do a thing. Okay, did you get the message? Did it ask you to hit yes or whatever?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because it usually does that now. It didn't used to do it before when I used to use this thing, but now it does, which I think that's kind of cool. Make sure people are, hey, are you consenting to this? So that's
Yeah, it
nice.
makes sense.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Really Good and Kind. I'm Cal, and with me today is Mr. Richard Nell, the writer of the book Kings of Paradise, Kings of Ash, and Kings of Heaven. You've got a new one coming out, is that right? Or did that one already
I
come out?
just released a new one. Yeah, Dark Seas End, it's called.
Okay, and that's one's kind of more about pirates in a similar setting.
Yeah, so it's the same world.
Mm,
Um, it'll be another trilogy called Beyond Ash and Sand. Ash and
okay.
Sand being the first trilogy. So it's set in the same world. There's some of the same characters, but then there's new ones, and there's sort of a new, more of an adventure plot as opposed to an epic fantasy plot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first book because that's all I've read so far. I'm going to read the others when they come out on audio. I will eventually get some hardbacks, but I'm pretty dyslexic, so listening is my primary method of imbibing fiction. So
I
I
see.
can't wait for the next couple to come out because those are going to be something I'm definitely going to get. Ralph Lister is already in my top. I want to say top 10 of narrators that are working right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's something else. One of my favorite books is Shogun by James Clavell,
Mm,
and I knew that Ralph Lister. I didn't know much about audiobook narrators at the time, but I knew he had narrated that, and he'd done such a great job that I thought, why not send this guy an email and see if he'll be interested, fully expecting that he'd say thanks very much for the inquiry, but bugger off.
mm,
Uh, but he said no, yeah, sure. He gave me his timelines and when he'd be available, and you got to pay quite a bit of money to get these professional actors to do this stuff. But
mm.
if you're willing to do that, then you can get them. And so I ended up working with them, and it was a bit surreal, to be honest.
That's amazing because if I understand right, in 2013, 2014, you decided, all right, I'm going to sit down in my basement with my computer and I'm going to get something written. Is it was that right, or did I read that wrong?
That's correct. And as you can see, things have changed vastly since then. Um, yes, in 2014, I think that's right. I quit my very proper grown-up job. I was working in an insurance company,
Mm,
and I decided to be a full-time writer, I guess, whatever the hell that means.
mhm.
And it took me another 2-3 years to write my first book, which is now Kings of Paradise.
Okay.
So I'd saved up quite a bit of money. I don't have a lot of bad habits. So I don't like boats or expensive cars
Mm,
or drugs or whatever it is that people spend their money on.
mm,
So I was able to save up to do that. Most writers, they can't quit their day jobs.
mm,
You don't make a lot of money at this unless you get up into the top, echelon, the top
mm.
5%. And I didn't know what Kings of Paradise would be when I first started writing it. It was just sort of finding my voice and finding out what I wanted to do, which is what took that sort of 2-3 years. But once I finally did sort of start writing it, probably took me about 9-10 months to write the book.
And was this setting or the world of Ash and Sand? How long did you have this kicking around in your head before you actually started to put finger to keyboard? I would say pen to paper, but it's a little antiquated now.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I do sometimes still write with the pen, just as I wander out of the basement for a little while.
Mm,
But I don't. That's a good question. I don't know. And writers are always terrified of these things because I think with a lot of us, we don't know where things come from. It's sort of an unconscious. The muse just strikes you or it doesn't. And
hmm
so when writers get what they call writer's block, or when people ask, where do you get your ideas, we always get a little bit fidgety
hmm
because it's like, well, I don't know. I just watched a lot of movies and I read a lot of books and I lived the life, and then stuff just started to percolate out of the primordial ooze, you know.
Hmm.
So there's a bit of that. But what I can say is that I'm a lover of history,
Hmm.
and I love fiction too. But so everything I write tends to be based on something out of real human history. So I steal cultures wholesale and I
Hmm.
tweak them a little bit, and then I add another culture and I mix it in. So in this book, you know, the two main cultures. One is sort of what you might call a bit Danish or Scandinavian.
Hmm.
Uh,
I was
you
thinking
know,
Iceland for some reason.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's a bit of different pieces of it. So Iceland is absolutely a place that I stole. You know, the Valley of Law and
Mm.
Alvarell. That is a real place in Iceland, actually. So good call there. So that's sort of the more Danish, the Viking sort of culture, you might call it. And then but I've tweaked it and I've given them a matriarchal spin. Um, and then there's the other culture, which is more Southeast Asian with a bit of a Polynesian mix.
Hmm.
Um, so, so I'm using real cultures and then I'm mixing them up basically.
Right. I think you find a lot of best-selling authors also do the exact same thing.
Oh yes,
Yeah, like George Martin famously stole the War of the Roses and turned it into with dragons, and then Robert Jordan, what's his name, Frank Herbert. They kind of took these Bedouin cultures and tweaked them a little bit to come up with the Bene Gesserit and the Fremen and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a time honored tradition to do that sort of thing.
yes, it for sure is. And well, even Tolkien, you know, I've talked about this a little bit before.
Mm-hmm.
When people talk about Middle Earth, I don't know if you know the background of this. Middle Earth is literally what the Danes called Earth, Middenheim.
Oh, okay.
And yes, and the reason they called it Middenheim or Middle Earth was because they believed that there was many worlds in the universe and that they all grew on an ash tree.
Mm.
So the ash tree had different branches, and in the middle of the ash tree was the Earth that we live on, Middenheim, and there were other, you know, Nordheim and Sudheim, and there's other worlds. So I stole that as well, where I've called my the guys who live in the Ascom the Men of Ash.
Mm-hmm.
And the Danes literally called themselves the Men of the Ash Tree, because that's what.
Ah,
Yes,
that is a good little connection. I had not, I knew, I kind of understood the Middenheim thing, but
right,
that's fascinating. It's a good call. So
right.
what
So
I'd
so
like to
now
do.
I've changed the mythology, and I've said, well, they think they've erupted out of a volcano, and therefore they're the men of the ash that erupted out of the volcano,
Mhm.
because all of life they thought grew from that. But it's my little nod to the Ascomani, as they called themselves.
Huh. So what I wanted to talk to you a couple things, character related, because when I first started reading the book, that first scene and chapter, I immediately needed to know what was going on here because I needed some justification for what I had just read. Basically, it's not a very nice scene. Uh, it's really dark. But the longer I stayed with Ruka, he started to remind me of like a combination between like Hannibal Lecter and the Wolfman, like as a
Interesting.
character. Because if you've read any of the old Thomas Harris books, Hannibal Lecter
Yes.
has a mind palace where he stores his memories and music and all of this stuff. And so when the theme of the Grove started to come up, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of understand what he's doing there. Um, but Ruka is terrifying on paper. Just you just give him his physical attributes and maybe what a couple of people have seen him do, and he's terrifying. But when you spend as much time in his head as we do, he's oddly one of the most relatable characters in the book. Just because I think you took a lot of time and care and really trying to put these concepts forward without outright stating them, like because I don't think they don't have a didactic word for a didactic memory, but the guy remembers everything he's ever seen and every word he's ever heard. So he's, in the top percentile of, brain activity. And then this is kind of the world that he is trying to operate in. And it's not a very fair one. And so the longer we stay with him, that I was in equal parts horrified and kind of excited to see what he would do next. To be like, okay, what's next on the block?
I've got you just where I want you.
Good.
Yes, well, he's definitely a fascinating character for me too. I don't know where he came from exactly, but I'd say he has haunted me for years. I hear him when I jog. When I'm writing stories, I hear his voice. So very interesting character. I could talk all about themes and all kinds of things, but I don't know if it's worth doing other than to say people are fascinated by this character so far, I've found, and that's good. Writers are always trying to create characters that people are going to love or hate, and he gets a little of both, I would say. And so far that there's sort of a joke that people are either on Team Kale or they're on Team Ruka.
I like Kale just fine. I
Yeah.
really do, but I mean, his society is not that great either. Farahi is a fascinating example of something that you were able to pull off there. But so they both come from these very rigidly structured places, and they both have similar thoughts about how they would like to see the world change. Whereas Ruka is he's like the masculine ideal taken way, way, way too far.
Yes.
And
So
Ruka is kind of like a shaman.
I think you're sort of hitting the nail right on the head with that. He's a very masculine character. And I've heard him described as sort of Cain and Abel in the same man.
The body, his body, and his actual voice in the grove.
Yes. Well, and once you get in farther into the series, you will see that play out. I don't want to spoil it, but you'll see that play out a bit more obviously, let's say.
Right at the end of not right at the end, but in the last quarter of the book is when he finally carries out his revenge against Kula. And right there in that moment, his body does something while the rest of him is still hiding away. And I don't know whether it's him trying to justify the fact that he wouldn't want to do something that horrible to himself, or, did I freeze or did you freeze? Did you freeze for a second or did I freeze?
Yeah. I froze for a second, but you're back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can't tell if it's a self-justification thing or if it's a legitimate split between his even baser natures and the rest of himself. So I do want to see where that goes.
Well, I think you're asking all the right questions, and it's always tough with when you've written these books that you don't want to spoil things for people, but you also, you're excited to talk about them. So I never know what to say other than what I'm hearing is exactly what I would expect to hear. And all I can say is you've got to finish reading the series.
All right.
Or listening to the
series. So let's talk Dalla for a minute. So her story is almost as horrifying as Ruka's. In the fact that she hardly ever gets her own hands dirty is almost makes it worse in a way. The chapters where she goes and she gets one of the nightmen to make sure she isn't ostracized from becoming a priestess. That whole thing is just I kept looking for the least terrible way out for the decision she was making and hoping that's what it was going to end up happening. And then, and no, it just happened exactly the worst way it possibly could have. And I didn't even actually blame her that much because, you know, she's just trying to survive, same as anybody else. And I think it's a really fascinating sort of dichotomy that you've worked there is in a place that's as Viking as that area, like to really put it in shorthand, Viking sort of an area. The fact that the women hold all the power of the law, I thought was really quite clever in the way you were able to pull that off.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, so as per usual, I guess I stole something. There's not too many matriarchal cultures in human history, but there are some. And actually, one of them still exists today, though it is completely transformed. And it's a Southeast Asian culture called the Minangkabau. And they have historically been matriarchal, though they have now largely converted to Islam. And so that's a much more patriarchal philosophy. But they, historically speaking, how it worked were that the women were essentially the heads of the household. So it would be the grandmother or the mother, it'd be a matriarchal figure, and she would own the property. So that's how they passed their land down matrilineally. So it would be from mother to daughter, daughter to daughter. And the way that it worked for the men essentially was that you were kicked off the land as soon as you came of age. So if you were a son, you were ejected from the family to go make your way in the world. And you were expected to go out and to learn and to make money and to be useful, and then you'd come back after sort of a sojourn, after a journey of becoming a man, and then you'd return and be useful. And typically when you came back, you'd marry into the richest family you could, and you would work your wife's land. So the men are still the farmers, the men are still the warriors, the men are still even the chiefs in this society, but they're doing everything ostensibly on behalf of their wives or their mothers or the matriarchal figure. So that is the sort of template that I took, and I mixed that into this warrior culture. And I just thought, what the hell would this look like? So as you can see, it's complicated because even though, let's say you've got the gender divide where men have rules, let's say religious rules in this case, if you kill a woman in this culture, you go straight to hell and you burn for 100 years. There are all kinds of laws against hitting the women in this society, or so there's all kinds of social pressure to give them all kinds of respect. But ultimately, you still have men and women who need to live together. You're still going to have wives and husbands who fight and sons that yell at their mothers. So you're going to have all that complexity. And also the men can still kill other men. So what I was trying to show is that in a society like ours, it's men who fill the prisons. It's men who are the soldiers on the battlefield. And there's reasons for that. So even if the women are in charge, they still have the same problems that men do. You still have to deal with the men who are criminals and who would rather take what they get through violence. You still have to deal with crops failing and flooding. And so it doesn't change the world as much as it was. There's sort of a modern belief maybe that if women ruled the world, that things would be different. And I was playing with that a little bit, let's say.
What I'm interested to find out is whether or not Nos is an actual person, and he's a personified being somewhere, or if it's just sort of the shorthand for rage, hate, murder, and all that sort of stuff. And then they keep referencing a story from the book where this one general went to do Nos's work rather than obey the law, and basically took over the whole area. And then the first priestess did something. It doesn't say whether she actually killed him or if she just got somebody else to do it or whatever. And he's like the big, he's the big reference to say, oh, that's a terrible man. I'm really interested to find out if that's like an actual event, or if it's just sort of a distillation of all of the worst traits being put into one person so that everyone has a shorthand to understand it.
Yes. Well, so with world building, I always try and keep it as light as possible. It's a
Mhm.
lot's in the background, but I try not to disrupt the story. There's some magical balance there that I'm trying to sort of strike. That's always difficult.
Mhm.
But so yes, there's sort of this culture is not particularly literate. Almost none
Mhm.
of the men can read. The women are taught, but not all the women. If you're a matriarch out in the farmland somewhere, you probably can't read. But if you live in the city and you're the daughter of somebody more important, then maybe you're taught.
Mhm.
So for the most part, they only have one book, and it's sort of their Bible, their book of stories, essentially.
Mhm.
And many of the stories have to do with sort of just as normal stories of our society would be, what the ideal men are, what the bad behavior is, what the ideal women are, and so on.
Mhm.
And so, yes, the one story, and they even call all of the men the Sons of Himmler.
Mhm.
That is sort of a shorthand way of describing the men of this culture. You're all the sons of Himmler,
Mhm.
because they don't track fatherhood; they track motherhood. Same as it's because it's matrilineal.
Mhm.
They only care who your mother was. That's how they track the family bloodlines. And so all of the men are seen as essentially um, the spiritual sons of this first man, this son of Himmler, who they think
Mhm.
of as sort of as a demigod. But he's also seen as a tyrant.
Mhm.
He's the example of what happens in this culture if a man is given too much power.
Right.
So that is the argument why men should not have too much power, because they become tyrants, they become the evil king, and they destroy society, basically.
Mhm.
So better, in other words, to have a group of women who are sort of the spiritual advisors and guidance of the society, in their opinion, and men should have more, they should have power, but in a lesser role.
Okay.
So Galdra is the prophet or the prophetess of this society, sort of as the religious figure, but they have many gods, and I imply that there's a sort of a new religion with this Galdra, and they have an old religion, and they have many more gods. And so
Mhm.
Ruka, he exploits that, and he eventually sort of resurrects the old gods, which are much more masculine gods,
Mm.
and trying to gather a group of sort of downtrodden men of this society by saying, look, you have a false prophet who has usurped the old religion, and I'm going to bring it back, and we're going to be on top again.
Mhm. The chiefless men. I think that's what he keeps calling
Yes.
them, the chiefless men, because there's even nightmen, which are basically like security guards, are are seen slightly better than chiefless men, but not by much, which is odd. But I don't know if it's peninsula or what, because I didn't get to really look at the map, but from um, the way it's described is it's like being way far north, and then the only reason anything grows around there is because of the volcanic soil, and so you just have these extremes of weather happening on top of the mountain may decide to go off again at any point. I did like the Skuld or Schuld. I think it's pronounced Schuld, or maybe that's the
You're
old
probably
Norse.
right. I'm not sure. I say scald, but if you went back to the original, it might be shawled. Yeah,
I think I was watching a Philip Chase video about poetry, and he says it's pronounced Schuld, and but I don't know.
I
He's
see.
he's wrong about some things, so it's,
Well, I'm not a linguist. I like these things, but I don't look into pronunciations typically.
right. Like I have an old copy of Paradise Lost somewhere where all the S's are still shaped
Oh
like
yeah,
F's, so it says Paradise Loft on the cover.
right.
So yeah, that gets super confusing to read. But so let's switch islands. Let's go over to the archipelago where you've got Kale, Farahi, and then these other upper kingdoms that I don't entirely grasp how they all interlock with each other yet, but I think we'll discover more the further I read.
Yeah.
Um,
So yes, these are very much modeled after Southeast Asian islands.
mhm,
Sort of city states. So there are kingdoms, but there are also sort of just cities that are ruled by little clusters of nobles.
mhm,
And the main power in these islands is one royal family in one island, which
mhm.
is the another main character, Kale, who's the fourth son of a king,
Is
and
their
who's
family name Ratama, or
Alaku. Alaku is the family name.
because I keep calling him Prince Ratama? Is why I.
Yes, so his first name is technically Ratama. His,
Oh, I'm
yes, his
embarrassed.
middle name is Kale, and everybody calls him Kale just because
Mhm,
he's sort of not important, and so he's been given a bit more affection almost, and just how people can speak to him, and it's sort of to diminish his status a little bit. He's
mhm.
because not only is he the fourth son, but he's also the son of a concubine, and so he's certainly nowhere near the throne. Let's put it that way.
Mhm. And then
Um,
he's got the older brother, his oldest brother, who is the heir apparent. And then the hostage daughter of a different island kingdom, or is it a different kingdom that's beyond the islands?
Yeah, it's a
Forgetting.
continental kingdom, sort of their closest neighbor on this much larger continent that's close
Hmm.
by.
And then what do you on the other side of that kingdom? You have the I like Ming Dynasty sort of equivalent.
Yes, in the I call it the Naranian Empire, but
Mhm.
it's certainly very much modeled after a Chinese dynasty.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's that's what it reminded me of when the guy
yes,
first showed up and said, he's but a slave to the emperor and all of that. And I was like, oh, okay. I think I get what it kind of reminded me of like old, um, like a sort of old Arabian empire mixed with a Ming
mm,
dynasty, just the way the people are described and everything. And
yeah,
how
I think that's fair.
so I really like that whole kingdom as a concept, and then we only get to spend a little bit of time there, which you tease. I was a little bit upset by that, but
Well, you
yeah,
get more. You get
okay.
more as the story progresses. Um, yes, well, hopefully, to any of your viewers here, it's a large world. That's
Mhm,
fair to say. It's sort of classic epic fantasy where the characters and the cultures in the book are not the only cultures.
mhm,
So there are many more people living outside of the story who don't even take part in it, or who might be affected by the events of the story, let's say, but are not in the key focus. Um, but yes, we do see a few of those cultures, and we see some characters from other cultures like Asna and Osco.
mhm,
Um, we see there are two more cultures. One is sort of almost like a gypsy culture that they don't have a land of their own anymore. They kind of migrate around.
mhm,
And the other is almost sort of Greek, or there's a bit of Spartan to them, where they're sort of a very harsh warrior culture, sort of like the Men of Ash,
mhm.
but they're much more, I don't know, I don't want to say civilized, but they have a more carefully constructed civilization around this warrior culture, much more on
Mm.
purpose that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. The thing I want to thank you for in this book is the magic that we do get. It's there's not a lot. We get a lot of hints, but we don't see a lot of big acts going on with the magic. But I do appreciate the way it's there. In one of my other videos, I've said this before, but when it comes to magic, harder is not better. I don't prefer that. Like one of the first really old fantasy books I read was by a computer programmer in like the 1990s. So it's a portal fantasy where he shows up to this world, and then, oh my goodness, magic works just like programming. And so he becomes a master wizard in like, 5 days or whatever. It's a silly romp, and there's like 9 of those books. I gave up after the second one. But I knew then that, hey, I don't really like this whole everything is codified way of doing it. I
Yeah,
don't know. It takes the
it's tricky.
joy out of the magic for me.
Yeah, I certainly understand that perspective, and I probably even share it. I can see the appeal of the hard magic systems too, but it is always very strange to me. So it depends on what kind of fantasy world you're building.
Mhm.
If you're trying to build a fantasy world which is more realistic, a George Martin style world where you can answer questions like how does the economy work, and
Mhm.
what do people believe, and there, a lot of fantasy worlds, they don't get into that kind of detail, or they don't even think about it very much. And so in a world like that, they can codify a hard magic system a bit easier, because they're relying more on the tropes of fantasy to just let you suspend your disbelief and just move ahead along with it.
Mhm.
Whereas a story like mine, I'm really trying to show a realistic world
Mhm.
inhabited by people who would act in a way that you would expect in that world. And
Mhm.
so if you have a world like that where the technology is quite low, and people who live in technology, even in our world, but especially in the past, they have all kinds of superstitions. They have
Mhm.
all kinds of beliefs about things that are completely wrong, right? Because they don't understand how they're getting sick, or what's making the crops die, or what's happening in the stars.
Yeah,
So they come
we
up with all
breathe
these
the night
ridiculous
air. It's
beliefs.
how we got malaria. It's because we breathe
Exactly.
the night air, not the mosquitoes.
Exactly.
It was the night air.
Yes. And and so in a world like that, to believe that they have codified their magic system,
Mhm.
that they understand the magic of this world in a way that's almost like science, and yet they can't solve infection, to me is completely ridiculous. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so I treat magic as I treat all those other things. They're sort of stumbling through the magic, no idea how it works. They invent their own beliefs about how it works, but those beliefs may not be true. And so they're sort of just stumbling through the world like we are,
Mhm.
not knowing how it works, and how the world truly is, and how the universe truly is. And so it's not so much that I think of it as a soft system that has no rules. It's just that they don't know the rules, therefore the reader doesn't know the rules.
I, I've I haven't read too many things that use astral projection as an idea for like the I don't want to, let's call it the means or medium of expressing the magic. Astral projection is not usually one that comes up a lot. You don't find that too much in, so okay, well, everyone can shoot exactly 1 inch of lightning out of their finger, unless they practice, and then they can get up to 3 inches of lightning out of their finger. Sort of world.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that because just in my own personal experiences, I've had those weird dreams where it feels like you're going up out of yourself and stuff like that. So anytime I see it recreated, I really enjoy that sort of stuff. But I like that. Even the guy who's doing it is not entirely sure how it all works. Uh, I think I
Yeah.
have a theory about the island with the room symbols test that he took. Is that even the guy giving out the tests wasn't entirely sure why they do it this way. It's like cutting the end off the ham. We've always done it this way, so we're going to do it this way. And then when he actually is able to surpass it, it's like, oh, maybe we should figure out why we tried to do it this way in the first place. So
I
I'm really excited to see how that sort of stuff shapes out.
I think you're the only person to have ever come up with that theory.
Mhm.
And I'd say it's correct. That, it's funny, this is often how humans behave, and not
Mhm.
just humans, there's other animals too. There's actually a famous experiment that was done with monkeys, where what they did essentially was they put a bunch of monkeys in a room,
Mhm.
and they put in two piles of food. One was sort of I don't remember what they were, but one was much more preferred by the monkeys, and the other was something they would eat if they had to, but they weren't excited about it.
Mhm.
Whenever they went for the less interesting pile of food, nothing happened. Whenever they went for the very good pile of food, the scientists sprayed the monkey with a hose, and then they sprayed all the other monkeys with the hose.
Oh no, group punishment.
Yes, and so they did this over and over again until the monkeys would take care of it themselves. Any monkey that went for the good pile of food, the other monkeys would take them and kick the crap out of them, basically.
Hmm.
So that was the first part experiment. The second was they began taking monkeys out of the group. So they would take one out, they replace them with a new one. And of course, eventually the new monkey would go for the pile of food. All the monkeys would take the monkey and beat him up and not let him do it. And they would just keep replacing, till they had completely taken out all of the monkeys that had ever
Wait,
seen the hose.
they ship of Theseus these monkeys.
They what?
Where they if you replace one part on a ship until all of the new parts on the ship are
Right.
no longer a part of the old ship. So they ship of
Correct.
Theseus the monkeys.
That's right.
That isn't okay.
So
I haven't heard this one.
yes, yes. So eventually they had an entire group of monkeys that had never seen the hose that they get if they went for the good pile of food.
Uh-huh.
However, they still, if a monkey went for the good group of food, would kick the crap out of them.
Huh.
So they had trained themselves that they look, any time a monkey goes for the good food, you beat them up because something bad will happen, or maybe they don't even know why they do it anymore. They just do it.
Mhm.
And it's human behavior is very much like that, where you take what your ancestors told you and you say, all right, that was a good idea, continue it. And it may even be a good idea, but you may have forgotten why you do it.
Okay.
Yes. So these things happen all the time, and they may be passing down some brilliant piece of knowledge to you, but maybe you lose it in translation, or maybe over the generations you don't remember why you were doing that, and so you might start to alter it slightly, or who knows, and you may lose the original meaning in the first place.
Hmm.
And so yes, that can absolutely happen, and I would say I've done that a couple of times in the books.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna not send Ralph Lister any emails to tell him to hurry up because that would be rude.
Well, so the second book is almost done. He's essentially done, actually, and it's now being edited by somebody else.
Okay, that's my least favorite activity on planet Earth is editing. It doesn't matter if I'm editing written stuff, audio stuff, or visual and audio. It is the most tedious task known to man. I've gotten a huge amount of respect for people who do that as a profession because I hate it. I absolutely hate it. It is my least favorite thing to do.
I hate it too. But I find even so, you're either in writing mode or you're in editing mode. And there's an old quote from oh good Lord, Hemingway, I think it was, who said, "Write drunk and edit sober." And
okay.
Yes, so it's a different skill. It's when you're writing, you want to throw away the rules, you want to do anything that comes to you, you want to just be lost in the creative process.
Even if for some people that's trying to write in second person, which should never be done ever.
I've never tried that, so I don't know. But yes, I can feel the difference when I'm writing. It's like being a kid. You're just playing. It's all lovely, and this is why people like to write. But then you get to the editing, which takes as long as the writing, maybe longer. And it can be horrifying. It can, it's like being you ever been in an employee evaluation,
yes.
at a job?
Yes.
Yeah. It's like being in an employee evaluation every day for months.
That sounds like stressful. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah. Nauseating.
You're just going through your own work thinking, Jesus, what did I do? Oh, it's crap. What was I thinking? This is, cut this. This is terrible. This doesn't work. So you just do that for like 6 months. And by the end, you hate yourself and pretty much everyone else. At least in my case. And then you finish and you get back to writing and everything's good again.
Yeah, it's whenever I have to go back and edit any of my own work, after writing it, I know what it says. And then, so when I'm trying to reread it for editing, I'll even put in the words that I meant to put there that I didn't actually put on the page. So I drop second articles all the time of I do that all of the time. And I still see them when I go back to edit and it's still not there when I go back and read it.
That's the worst.
I just, drives me nuts.
I catch words or phrases that I use again and again. So that's just painful. And once you've spotted it, once you realize you do that, it's horrifying.
Yeah, you can't unsee it.
But no,
Like
you can't.
in
And
Dune,
Sydney,
his is presently. Frank Herbert uses presently.
yes,
Like, oh,
yes,
I think once every like 7 pages in Dune, it's
good.
there.
I do something like that. I don't use presently, but when I'm trying to note urgency, I'll put
Mhm.
in a word that's like quickly, or
Mhm.
you know, and then I'll catch myself doing it. And you really don't have to do it. If you just, I'm going to get lost in the weeds here, but if you just put exactly what happened,
Mhm.
and then you do it with good strong verbs, and you do it in order, it will innately, it will instinctively create that sense of urgency in the reader. You don't have to tell them it happened quickly. You just have to show 5 things happening in a row in fairly short sentences, and they will get the impression that it's happening quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it creates its own rhythm by itself.
Yes. Yes, it has
Like,
its own feeling. The action will propel itself
mm,
forward.
as good as adverbs are in conversation, I get tired of the amount of adverbs that I use, even just in anything all the time. It bugs me. Like, if I to the
You
point
can
where
use
I
them.
control FLY just to see how many showed up. But
That's funny. There's writers who will tell you never use adverbs, and
mm.
they're wrong. But you do have to use them judiciously. You do have to be.
That is just a good, whether you meant that to be a pun or not, I very much appreciated it on the level of pun. That was great. So I want to talk about Farahi for a minute, and then we can, if you got any questions for me, I'll be happy to do whatever. But Farahi reminded me of Tywin Lannister, but like if he didn't have as good as of a poker face as Tywin Lannister does, because in some of the scenes in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, uh, you can get where Tywin has these human emotions. He hardly ever shows them, and I don't think he really ever does. It's always talked about in memory whenever it's him. But with Farahi, he's the same sort of coldly calculate. He even tells like a Reigns of Castamere sort of story to his both of his sons, and he's like proud of it. But at the same time, whenever they're defying him and showing what they're made of, he's happy to see it. And actually, you can see that in his face for a little bit before it moves on, which is a really difficult sort of character to bring across, because they either come across as just mustache twirlingly evil, even when they're not supposed to be, or they're just not as compelling. But I really enjoyed. We don't really get any of his headspace, but seeing how other people view what he does was just chef's kiss. Very good.
That's good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So I think you're going to enjoy book 2.
Okay.
You're going to get more Farahi. Um, so yeah, it's tough to be king,
Mm-hmm.
and people always sort of give a bad rap to these Tywin type characters, to these cold calculating kings who are, they may do some horrifying things, but people have to understand that history is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a world, even today, we still have lots of sort of nasty things going on between state actors, and the world is not as if it's a lovely warm place everywhere you go now, but we are still a much better world than was in the past. And these kings, just to stay alive, had to be pretty ruthless, because everybody wanted to take these guys down. And so Farahi's story, you get bits and pieces of it, but he is sort of one of the last Alakus of his generation.
Mm-hmm.
Many of his siblings, many of his elders were killed or died. There's sort of a story that they all died of disease, or there's another story that they died on a boat that sunk. So we don't know the truth, but we do know, and he's also called a kinslayer because people think that he's the one who killed much of his family.
Mhm.
So we don't know. We don't know the truth. We just know that he's called the Sorcerer King. We know that there's some nastiness in his past, and he's got to be very tough. He's sort of the top king of these islands where everybody wants to take him down, and in order to just stay alive, he's got to be very cold and calculating and ruthless. So that is who we see from Kale's perspective.
Mhm.
Is it justified? Is it not justified? I don't know.
Well,
But
I would say
but
for Kale, it is justified. For
yeah, you
anyone,
think so?
not Kale, it probably comes off as naive a little bit. But
Right.
like, Kale is what? How old when he goes to the Marines? What is he, like
Sort of
16, 17?
17-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember what I thought the world looked like at 17, and I'm very glad that in most cases I was wrong. But it can certainly appear that way just because, I mean, his dad doesn't really break anything down for him until way late because he just
Right.
thinks everyone should understand this already. Why should I have to explain it? And so
Right.
when you have that clash of not needing information, not having it, and having information, but what, this should be obvious to you, uh, you end up with really cross purposes, is putting it rather mildly, but I think
Yeah.
it's a completely understandable dynamic for Kale. Yeah.
Yeah. I think again you've sort of touched on it exactly, where the real gap between Farahi and Kale is their understanding of the world. And it seems a bit from Farahi's perspective is that he thinks Kale should understand the world better. But you have kids and I have kids. I would blame myself if my son was naive and didn't understand. It's sort of what is a father's responsibility is to teach their children about the world. And so you can apply blame in both directions, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
in this relationship, because ultimately you're responsible for yourself, and so Kale is responsible for himself, but also you would expect the father to be better at teaching him about the world.
Well, I can imagine from Farahi's perspective, Kale can be utterly frustrating.
I can imagine. Yes.
Because he sends him off to the military to be like, okay, if you can handle this, then we can give you more stuff to do. And he goes in there. Not only does he pass his classes, but he also like gets nearly the entire Marine class on his team, like his specific team, to where they respect him, look up to him, seek his advice, do what he says. So as a dad sending someone to the Marines, you passed, you did good. But also, he turns around and just defies him when he thinks that he's finally starting to get it. What are you doing? Like, so I can completely see how, from Farahi's perspective, he would be proud of him one moment and be like, I'm gonna cut your head off. You are incredibly frustrating for me to deal with.
Yeah, well, I remember an old quote. I can't remember where I read it, but it was talking about how to be a king.
Mhm.
And he said essentially you have three jobs. One, and the first job was control your sons. That was the sort of primary goal or the primary job of the kingdom, as far as this king was concerned, was to make sure your sons are not out of control and that they're being taught properly.
Mhm.
And the second was stay alive. So he thought making sure you've got an heir and making sure your heir is good was even more important than keeping alive. And number
Hmm.
three was doing something useful.
Huh.
So
That's not Machiavelli. It's been forever since I've read The Prince. So
I don't think so. I can't remember what it was now, but I think Machiavelli's got, for the prince, there's different rules. He's got more than three for sure.
oh yeah, he's got like 27 or something like that. It's
Yeah,
been, like I said, I haven't read it since college, so it's been a while. But no,
yeah.
that is
But
quite
I
interesting.
bet
The
I bet
first
those are in there. But yeah,
the first one is control your sons, because that's probably just a good rule for parents in general. Like, rule number one, as there's the whole old adage about boys will be boys. but it's like unsupervised naivety is dangerous.
Yes, well, unsupervised naivety is definitely dangerous. Your sons can be tyrants, because especially if you've got an heir,
Mm-hmm.
um, everybody knows that guy's going to be king one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the amount of soft power that your heir wields is incredible, even though he's not technically in charge of anything yet, unless, whatever power you give him. Everybody knows he's going to be king. And so everybody licks his boots.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinking ahead, right? Then, okay, the old king is going to die, and then this guy's going to be in charge, so we better do what he says. So there's always this great strain there. And so if you lose control of your heir, you got big problems.
Yeah, it's
So
like Uday Hussein
anyway,
is like a modern day
exactly.
example of someone who didn't follow
Exactly.
rule one, which is control your sons.
Yeah.
Because,
And
well, I don't
so
even
this
think
has
it was
been
they were going to pass it on to Uday, right? Like, because Saddam took over, but Uday would kind of have to do a soft coup in order to retake over after Saddam. But
yeah, well, there's been different ways to handle this. And but it is just a huge concern for because human history is a history of kings, typically speaking.
Mhm.
And so this has been a primary concern for human evolution, or the passing of civilization, until we came up with things like democracy.
Mhm.
That was huge problems. And whether you've got one son that you make the heir, or one child, or whether you get a family to vote on who's going to be in charge, or it's just been a big problem.
Hmm.
And so this is something that Farahi is very worried about, and he's got his heir, I would say, pretty controlled, but he doesn't worry about the other sons.
Mhm.
And that might be a mistake.
So I've got another random question for you. Are you ever planning on doing any science fiction sort of settings, or are you going to stick mostly in the fantasy sort of genre?
Good question. I don't know is the answer. I do like science fiction. I don't read it that often. And if I did it, it would be more in the line of Dune than
Mm.
it would be in the line of Star Trek or something. Or, well, I guess Star Trek's a bad example, because they're pretty character focused, and they're pretty, I'm not a hard sci-fi guy. I'm not all that
Mm.
interested in the technology for the technology's sake. But I am interested in thinking about what the future looks like.
Right. It's like
So,
in modern day storytellers have to find excuses for cell phones and everything now. Because most of the problems could be solved with clear communication, and you can't have clear communication if you don't have a cell phone. So they have to find a way to get rid of that. But what I'm interested in is like, okay, so what future problems are people gonna like once instantaneous sort of like, okay, say there's actually instantaneous travel available. What's what are that could solve so many problems just instantly. Like whether it's two people who are mad enough to hurt each other, just okay, one of them's now several thousand miles away. Not that worry about it. But so it's like how are they going to write around those sorts of issues? It's like,
yeah,
make it cost
well,
prohibitive or
right. Well, as I say, there's a lot of things you can do with sci-fi, but when I think about sci-fi and when I think about the future, I think fundamentally, um, the main barrier is human limitation.
mm,
That's the problem, is that evolution's not fast enough. So science is going to have to solve that problem. Either we're going to have to evolve ourselves, biologically speaking, or we're going to have to use machines to enhance ourselves. We
mm.
already do that. I mean, the cell phone in your pocket already makes you a little bit of a cyborg, as Elon Musk said. So, and the way he puts it is, there's a problem with the input output. Like your brain can't handle the speed that the data transfer could allow for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you could if you could low jack yourself, if you could stick in a USB port, or something better, and you could hook up a machine to that, you could be downloading information much quicker. We just can't do it. So is that the future? Are we going to be all hooked up to machines where we can pass data much more quickly? Maybe. but that is the fundamental problem, that we have now created technology that has surpassed us, right?
Mhm.
Machines can calculate things at speeds that make the human look like an amoeba, right? So what do we do with that? I don't know is the answer. And we're going to have to solve that. So that if I wrote sci-fi, that's what it would look like. It would be, how does a human being evolve itself or compensate for our biological weaknesses, going into a universe that is unbelievably vast, and
Yeah.
so much more terrifying than, it's so funny. People talk about going into the final frontier, right? As if
Mhm.
we have explored the earth and all that's left is the universe. And it's like, no, you're thinking about this wrong. The universe is huge. We have explored a tiny little bit.
It's like we
And
still
so
we
it's not,
still don't know everything that's in the ocean. So
no, that's right. Or the
like,
center of the earth. I mean, we've only gone this far into the earth, just a little bit into the crust. If we try and go further, it melts our tools basically,
hmm,
because it gets so hot.
right.
So
Friction.
it's just so funny, because we think we've explored everything and we're masters of our own planet, and it's like, no, we're not at all. We literally don't know what's at the center of the earth. We have guessed, we think we know, but we
Mhm.
don't know, until we get there, right? Until they've dug further, until they've dug deeper through these trenches and so on. But we just can't do it. So to me, the great adventure is the universe. And here we're still on Earth talking about dividing up the spoils and trying to make things equitable. And it's like,
Mhm.
it's like, no, start mining asteroids, get to Mars, get to outside the solar system. So if I were to do science fiction, it would be about that.
Well, I think you've hit on a couple things that because you're a very character focused writer. You spend a lot of time with the people you're going to tell the story with. That I think there's a dearth of character driven sci-fi. There's not that much of it. I was going to
Mhm.
say paucity, and then I came up with the wrong word. But there's a paucity of character-driven sci-fi out there. So I would be interested to see what you can come up with, because, like I said, I enjoyed this book so much. I read it twice. Started telling all of the people on my Discord they need to read this book right now. This is my favorite thing I've read this year. It really is. I really enjoyed this book, and I
Well, I'm
think you
certainly glad
deserve
to
all
hear
the
that.
props for it. Is there, so you're working on a second trilogy now based in the um, Ash and Sand world, for lack of a better term, for now. And but maybe you're going to get a sci-fi book. What else? What else do you have planned? Do you have anything you want to tell people about?
So right now I'm actually taking a break. So my plan in going forward is to do an Ash and Sand book, then to write something completely unrelated,
Mm,
Ash and Sand book, back and forth. Just because it's just a bit of a mental break from when you're writing these big epic series. They sort of wear me down. I don't know if other people experience this, but for me, it's a bit of a mental drain. So it's nice to take a little sort of shorter break. But I'm actually working on something that's a complete side project from them, and it's how do I describe it? It's sort of a progression fantasy, but only very mildly.
okay.
Um, it's about one character in this frontier town in a science fiction setting who has essentially a portal to hell just outside the town. And the book is him descending down into hell. Um,
Okay.
so that, yeah. So did you ever play the video game Diablo?
Yeah, I played Diablo 2 back when it first came out.
Okay.
That was
All right.
that was a while back. Yeah.
Yes, this was many years ago. So there's a bit of inspiration from the video game Diablo. There's a bit of inspiration from the Divine Comedy, or Dante's Inferno.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a bit of a trippy mind fuck of this guy going down into this his own dark past, and his own, but there's also the physical actual realm of hell. He's got a talking sword, and he finds a baby dragon that become his companions. facing some darkness, and he's ostensibly trying to save someone who has fallen down, and he's chasing after them. So that's the
Okay.
story, and how it ends, I'm still not sure.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait. That sounds awesome. But again, thank you so much for doing this. I had an absolute blast. I would like to do it again for the next one once I'm able to consume it. Be
Happy
it
to.
whether I takes 19 days to actually read the whole thing after rereading parts over and over and over again, or it comes out on audio, just to see how wrong I was, because most of the time I am. But really, thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome.
My pleasure. Happy to do it anytime.
All right, and we'll see you next time. Where is the?
Take care.